Hey there. I don't know if you've heard, but there's a great new radio show on Para X. 2 hosts, 1 hour, and too much fun. Stephanie and Heidi not only talk about the latest goings-on in the supernatural worlds, they live it. They want to hear from you. They want to help you understand and guide you. And they want you to tune in. So, grab a friend or come alone to gather around that metaphysical table with Heidi and Stephanie. If you're interested in the worlds of the unseen, tune in to the Gathering Radio Show, Tuesdays at 9 p.m. Eastern on Para X Radio.
Hi, this is Barry Fitzgerald, and I'll see you in the shadows.
Your source for everything paranormal. Para X. The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host and their guests do not necessarily reflect those of Para X, its affiliates, or its sponsors.
Welcome to another Monday night here on the Shadows Radio. I am Rebecca.
I'm Cara.
And we are so excited that you could join us here this evening. And our microphones are super loud. I apologize if we just blew your eardrums out. I did not set the levels tonight.
Wake up.
Yeah, seriously. My bad. And those of you who are driving who just veered off the road, sorry about that. So first off, I got to say, I know that we had talked about doing a kind of best of tribute for Mark here at the end of the year. And for those of you who are not aware, our original co-host Mark Davis passed away about a month ago. Unfortunately, my grandmother passed away a few weeks ago, 2 weeks ago actually at this point. And that put a huge kink in my plans, and I just didn't have the time to deal with that and then turn around and put together something that I felt was actually worthy of Mark and his contribution to the show. So we are going to do that. We'll probably do it after the new year, obviously, because this is our last show for 2018. Oh my God, this is our last show for 2018. How'd that happen?
Yeah, how'd that happen?
But I just wanted to say that it is totally my fault that we're not doing it tonight. So, I know some people were looking forward to that and reliving some of our older train wrecks rather than our current train wrecks. So I apologize for that. And again, the fact that we've been kind of on and off the air for the last couple of weeks has also been totally my fault. Like I said, we lost Mark, and then I turned around and lost my grandmother a couple of weeks later, and it was just not the best time to be in my house. So I apologize for that, but we are live tonight. Welcome here. And the Steelers beat the Patriots, so I'm super happy. I am a happy camper.
Oh my goodness.
I'm such a nerd. Okay.
But it's those little things.
It is the little things that make every day better. Anyway, so I was going to talk about this, our last show of the year. What were we going to talk about? We always do Christmas traditions. We always do, we did Saturnalia last year. Like, there's all these different things that we've done in the past. So I thought about it. I'm like, wait a minute. And then I looked at some of the other shows on Para X, and somebody already did Krampus. Somebody already did weird Christmas traditions. The Odyssey Files right in front of us were doing, the physics of Santa Claus. So there's a whole lot of people that are already doing all the things that we were talking about. So, I thought we'd go somewhere totally
Christmassy.
Yes, totally not Christmassy. And go with time travel. Because that's always fun. Right? No?
Oh, it always boggles my brain. Because I never understand it.
Bizarre. And this story I first heard about, like I said, I've mentioned a podcast that I listen to pretty regularly called Stuff You Missed in History Class. Mm-hmm. And I heard a podcast that they did from probably 4 or 5 years ago on this specific story, just kind of telling the story and everything. And I listened to it, I'm like, really? Like that's actually, so that drove me down the rabbit hole of Google and YouTube and books and everything else. So is a lot of stuff going on. So interesting. But we're going to talk about time travel at the Palace of Versailles.
Yeah, and this is not something that happened recently either.
No. So this actually happened right around the turn of the century, meaning the 1900 turn of the century, not modern turn of the century, because I guess we can't say that anymore, can we?
Mm-hmm.
So in 1911, a book came out called An Adventure, published under the name Elizabeth Morrison and Frances Lamont. And it described a visit that they made to Petit Trianon, which is the chateau on the grounds of the Palace of Versailles. If you've ever seen photos of Versailles, it's the small boxy palace, and I say small, but it's like, 7 times bigger than my house. That's kind of off to the side. It wasn't part of the palace grounds. You have to kind of wander through the woods to get to it. And it was built for Marie Antoinette and her friends to basically get away from court and just do whatever it is that they wanted to do. They weren't under the eye of the king, so they could kind of act silly. They would put on plays, they would paint, they would drink, they would laugh, so this was kind of their little pleasure palace, if you will.
Oh.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you go deep into the history of Petit Trianon, there is actually people who say, oh, she used this for her dalliances and her affairs, and she made out with this guy and had sex with this guy, and she, all these different stories. So there's a lot of rumor around what actually happened in Petit Trianon, but honestly, nobody knows but Marie Antoinette, and she's clearly not saying anything anymore. So,
clearly. Yeah.
So in 1911, like I said, this book comes out, and people are reading this book about this adventure, Petit Trianon, and they're thinking that it's totally fiction. And the story basically goes like this. These two women in the Victorian period were walking the Palace of Versailles. They get lost. This is August 10th, 1901. And they get lost on the grounds of Versailles, and they end up at Petit Trianon. And during their process, they are transported back to the time of Marie Antoinette. And so this whole book comes out, and people are thinking, oh, this is a made-up story, especially because the names that they was published under were fictional.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to tell you kind of the version that, a summary version of what actually happened. But the two women's names were actually Charlotte Ann Moberly and Eleanor Jourdain. So they were not, they were publishing under a pen name because they were afraid of being ridiculed, but not afraid to take money from the book. But anyway, that's a different story. Okay. So Moberly was a professional, not a hooker, but a professional. She was a principal for young women at St. Hugh's College in Oxford. And Jourdain was actually her assistant. She was the daughter of a reverend, a vicar. And she was a sister of an art historian. So both these women were very educated, kind of upstanding women who were, I guess, in respectable positions. So there's no reason for them to, reputation-wise, for them to put something like this together. So Jourdain actually authored textbooks, ran a school of her own, and then, like I said, she worked for St. Hugh's College. So they had some pretty, like I said, upstanding reputation before we get into the story. So. All right. So on August 10th, 1901, they traveled by train to Versailles. They didn't think much of the main palace after touring it, and they decided to walk the grounds and walk over to Petit Trianon. On the way, they reached the Grand Trianon, which is another outbuilding that you can visit, found it was closed to the public. So they were walking along with a guidebook, but they became lost after missing a turn for the avenue that would take them to Petit Trianon. So they passed the road, they entered a small lane, which was kind of overgrown and, not very well kept. It didn't look like a lane they probably should have been down. It was more like a service road or like a small path rather than the main road that they were supposed to be traveling on. So they start wandering towards their destination, and they start wandering for quite a while. They say that everything got really dark. They felt oppressed and dreariness. They noticed a woman shaking a white cloth out of the window of a building, an old deserted farmhouse with an old plow outside. Again, things that like were out of place at the time, but didn't really, register as out of place.
Right.
And again, they got that feeling of oppression, dreariness. Then they saw a man who looked like a palace gardener, who told them to go straight on and they'll arrive at Petit Trianon. Moberly describes the men as very dignified officials dressed in a long grayish-green coat with small three-cornered hats. And at the time, she remarked that they must have been dressed in costume to kind of get a feel for the place. At the time, this was public space, but it was not like a museum space. So it was like a public park, but it wasn't really designed. So you could go and you could wander the fields and the village and whatever. Mm-hmm. But there wasn't anybody really doing major upkeep. So for the fact that there was these people in coats and costume that they thought was kind of a little out of place. So Jourdain noticed a cottage with a woman and the girl in the doorway. The woman was holding out a jug, and she described it as a tableau vivant, which is much like a living picture, much like a Madame Tussauds waxwork. Moberly, however, did not see the cottage, but she felt the atmosphere change. She said, quote, everything suddenly looked unnatural, therefore unpleasant. Even the trees seemed to become flat and lifeless, like woodworked in tapestry. There was no effect of light and shade, and no wind in the trees. So they reached the edge of the woods close to the Temple de Mort and came across a man seated beside what they were calling a garden kiosk, which it was basically a circle of like a patio circle with these pillars and a domed area. He was wearing a large cloak and a large hat. According to Moberly, his appearance was, quote, most repulsive, its expression odious. His complexion was dark and rough. Jourdain noted, quote, that the man slowly turned his face, which was marked by that of smallpox. Mm-hmm. His complexion was very dark, his expression evil and unseeing. And though I did not feel that he was looking particularly at us, I felt a repugnance to going past him. Later, they would add that the man was described as tall with large dark eyes and crisp, curling black hair under a large sombrero-style hat. And he would show them the way to Petit Trianon. So after crossing a bridge, they reached the garden in front of the palace, and Moberly notices a lady sketching on the grass who looks up at them. She later describes in great detail. The lady was wearing a light summer dress. On her head was a shady white hat, and she had a lot of fair hair. Moberly thought at first she might be a tourist, but the dress appeared to be old-fashioned. And then she again thought, oh, maybe this is someone in costume. But then later, upon further review, Moberly came to believe that the lady was Marie Antoinette herself. Jourdain, however, did not see the lady. After this, they were directed round to the entrance and joined the party of other visitors. After touring the house, they had tea at the hotel and returned to her apartments. So after leaving Versailles, neither Jourdain nor Moberly mentioned the incident until over a week had passed. Moberly wrote a letter about the trip to her sister, and when she got to the afternoon of the Versailles incident, she asked Jourdain if she had thought Petit Trianon was haunted. Jourdain told her that she thought it was. 3 months later, they compared their notes and decided to write separate accounts of what had happened and research the history of the Trianon. In doing so, they found that 10th of August, 1792, it was when the palace in Paris was besieged, and the king's Swiss guards were massacred, and the monarchy was abolished. So they visited the Trianon gardens again on several occasions, but were unable to trace the same path that they took. Various landmarks, such as the kiosk and the bridge, were actually missing and had since been removed. And the grounds themselves were full of people and very much clean and more kempt than they had appeared in their original visit. So they tried to explain it away by saying they'd stumbled across a private party or an event that was booked that day. But upon researching it with the management of the palace, they said that there was nothing and no one in costume on the grounds. So finally, they came across a portrait of a man called the Comte de Védéroux.
Say that again.
The Comte de Védéroux. He was a friend of Marie Antoinette, and he actually was the man with the odious man with the scar on his face and the evil look that they didn't want to walk past. and that's who they thought they saw sitting in that kiosk. So they published an adventure in 1911 under the pseudonyms of Elizabeth Morrison and Frances Lamont. And the book claimed that they had encountered Marie Antoinette in 1901, and it caused a huge sensation. But again, like I said, many people did not take the book too seriously on the grounds of obviously time travel implausibilities and the inconsistencies that they claim it was. And we can get into a lot of some of the explanations in history. But first, I mean, what do you think about that? Have you? I mean, I guess.
I've never experienced time travel, but anything is possible. I mean, it's not like it seems like they didn't take this lightly, because it's not like it happened and they, a month later they decided to write about this. This was 10 years later that they, decided to put the story out, and they did it. It says here that they, did extensive research comparing, maps and.
Yeah. And that's actually one of the complaints that I found from the Psychic Institute. Hold on. Let me find the exact name so I'm not butchering this here. I scrolled too far. Where did I go? The Society for Psychical Research. Mm-hmm. Eleanor Mildred Sidgwick actually said, and she suggested that the women, because they had put the book out so far after, and they seemed to keep adding detail every time they told the story. Like first it was a man sitting in the kiosk, then it was a man with a scar on his face, then it was a man with smallpox scars. Oh, and then it conveniently was the Comte de whatever. She's saying that that the research was actually guiding their memory, which caused some incidents in the retellings, which I think is an interesting concept because I've had the same problem at times where I'm trying to remember something. Somebody goes, "Oh, weren't you wearing this?" And you're like, "Oh yeah, I was." "Oh no, I wasn't." So.
Well, but where do you draw the line where it's like, well, we were doing research and I found a picture of this person and that's the face that I saw?
Yeah, and I mean, you have to kind of understand, that sometimes there's always going to be skeptics out there who like to stomp their feet and pound their chest and say, no, not true because. But again, I mean, it is interesting to think that is one of the drawbacks, at least in this case, was that they did so much research before writing down all the details. Like they should have put the details all down, set them over here, and then started digging. Because at least that would have given it a little more credence rather than I knew it was in my head, and then I started digging, and then I started writing it down. So what I wrote down, was it what I was researching, or was it the truth? You know what I mean?
Gotcha. Okay.
So one important thing to note, I guess, while we're chatting about this is that actually, like I said, they published an adventure under pseudonyms, and they actually did not reveal the authoresses of the book until 1931. So 20 years after the book came out, and Eleanor Jourdain was already dead. She had died in 1924, and Charlotte Moberly actually passed away in 1937. So I mean, she wasn't there for much longer. But it was interesting. So have you ever had that happen where you go into a location and you start walking around or something and it just feels like you just, I don't know, sidestep the time continuum for a second?
It happened to me once when I was 15. Gettysburg. That's when Gettysburg got on my radar. And we were riding one of those trains, and I didn't see anything, but I could close my eyes and feel soldiers coming out of the forest towards the train. And that wasn't exactly time travel. It was just experiencing the emotions of the area. Because I didn't see anything. That's as close as I got. That's as close as I've ever gotten to something like that. I kept feeling like, oh my God, something's going to happen. Like people are coming out of the woods. Why are they coming out of, like, it was literally like, I was so confused, but all these feelings, all these rush of feelings and war and I was 15. I don't know, family vacation, I'm like, whoa, that was the craziest train ride I've ever had. But I mean, that's probably the closest. I've never had anything where I slip into another time and space and feel that
that you've made that transition. Yeah.
Yeah.
I honestly, I'm trying to think of a specific, I know it's happened to me. I just, for some reason, I can never hold on to those details. Like, I have a hard time when something like this happens to me. I never remember it perfectly. Like, I come back, I'm like, oh, that happened to me. Oh, wait. But I think most recently it happened to me. So I was recently on Mackinac Island at the Grand Hotel, which was built in the late 1800s, I think. And one of their heydays was the Victorian period with the people with the high teas and the fancy dresses and, 17-course meals. And, like, that's the whole, the vibe of this place. And there's a few times I rounded a corner and I was like, what happened? Like, it just felt different, and then I would take a couple steps and it would go back to normal. And I'd be like, I don't know what's going on now. It could have been the wine that we were drinking, but, but that's kind of one of those places where, and sometimes I feel like I have this problem with some sites that are just drenched in history, where I think I let the stories overpower my feelings and I get kind of that, I don't know, I'll call it a fake feeling of transportation. Well,
I think if you don't necessarily see it, but you feel it could be the same thing. Just because you know what I mean? Because I think you feel things a lot easier than you actually see them, because your mind doesn't. It's like your mind doesn't want to accept it. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Because like when people who like say, I've never seen a spirit. Well, you're never going to. Yeah. With that, it's just, it's not like performing monkeys, but it's, you feel it and you can, like I said, I closed my eyes and I could probably see it. But it's just not going to happen like it does in the movies or on TV. It's just, that's the way I feel. But there's been stories somebody wrote in the chat room about, stories out there, people going in elevators and going to different floors and ending up in a different time. I remember the one I heard from people was being on an elevator somewhere, like and the doors opening up to like a Civil War hospital. Like they would go down, I forget what building it was.
Yeah.
But literally the doors would open and they would see like the Civil War hospital and all these wounded people and people running around. I've heard those quite a bit, but unfortunately, we never get those.
Yeah. I was gonna say something and I totally just lost it. I've actually been to Petit Trianon just to kind of pull this back together and make it all about me, because everything's all about me.
Oh, well.
I was on Versailles, and I'll be honest with you, the Palace of Versailles, for as large and as immaculate and as immense as it is, like these women say, I was more impressed with the grounds. There's the peasant village that's there. That's really cool. There's all these little outbuilding apartments and things that are cool, and the fountains and the landscaping, and the actual palace itself is cool, but it's not like I said, they were underwhelmed by the palace. I kind of feel like I kind of was too, but Petit Trianon, I was in there and I didn't see squat, so I kind of feel robbed.
I went there. Well, they were walking the grounds, and if they weren't paying attention to where they're going, God knows where they ended up. But I have to tell you, when you go to those palaces and stuff like that, it's most of the time the grounds are the most amazing. Because I remember Hampton Palace. Yeah, the place is amazing, but you go on the grounds and it's just like the mazes and the gardens and the fountains, and you're like, holy crap.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I have to agree with you. Most of the time, you go outside and you're like, okay, this is better than the house.
Yeah. So a few suggestions as to kind of what these women experienced. So psychologist Leonard Zuzny
Drugs.
No, he said it was a hallucinatory experience that was just embellished over time as the story grew and took on a life of its own. They just kept building on it. Brian Dunning of Skeptoid did a lot of research and concluded that there were mistakes made. He says that as an adventure was printed and reprinted, they kept adding in more detail, like I said.
Mm-hmm.
The sketching woman didn't even appear until 3.5 months after the first version was written. Then she pops in. Then they start sharing notes and historical research, and suddenly they decided 1789. Then they decide that that it's the Comte, and it's it's Marie Antoinette. And then there's actually one part of the story that I realized I skipped. So when they were walking down the path after they had passed the Comte in his little kiosk, they had seen a page running down a very out of breath page running down the path. Mm-hmm. And they had stopped him and asked him for directions to the palace, and he had pointed or whatever, and then he continued to run in the same direction that he was pointing them. And that's kind of significant because August 10th is the day that the page came to tell Marie Antoinette that the monarchy had fallen and the revolution was about to get very nasty for them.
Right.
So they believe that that's the page that they saw running. So again, did that page show up in the original story? He did. But could it have just been a guy running down the path trying to get somewhere as a gardener? I don't know. Possibly. So I don't know. I don't know what to believe. I mean, I find it unique that they had this experience because I feel like personally I've had similar experiences. Mm-hmm. But I'm not entirely sure that it is to the level that they experienced. And with the amount of history and the amount of stuff flying around at that palace, I can imagine that there's a lot going on.
Well, in the story, it said somewhere that the story, the early accounts, they sent early accounts to the Society of Psychical Research.
Yes, that's a fun name. I feel like we need to talk to them.
I know. And so in the book, so things did change. I think that's the one thing that it's makes it a little bit hard to believe is that the story's changed, because usually when something happens to somebody and it's true and honest and a true honest account, it never changes. The story never changes.
I mean, the details might fluctuate a little bit, but they're always there.
Right. And I know that doing their research, because they want to put pieces together, but at some point doing your research, because it's your brain. We don't know much about the mind. So they even say that, when eyewitnesses to accidents can't even get the right information. You have somebody I think we talked about this before. We have 10 different people watching an accident. You'll have 10 different accounts.
Yeah.
So, but them doing research to more on it, I think maybe made it more disbelievable. Is that a word?
Yes.
Am I making up words?
No.
Darn it. Maybe if they didn't do research and just wrote what they experienced, it wouldn't be a book. It'd be a pamphlet, but
it would be a sticky note.
But then also, in the age that they wrote this book, it's not like they had the internet to go to. They had to do actual research and go to libraries.
Effort.
There was a lot of effort into this. So it's not like, they took this lightly either. I mean, you go back and forth all day.
Yeah, I mean, these are two scholarly. You could kind of argue that these women run schools. They have access to probably resources that the average person didn't have resources to, and probably had some more time to do that kind of research than the average working, shop girl or whatever.
Right.
They were around libraries on a regular basis. They probably had access to museums or contacts that could, send them information or whatever. So you could make that argument as well. But yes, you're right. They had to commit to this and say, we have to figure out what happened. So, I mean, they get props for that, So.
Oh yeah. And they, to the day they died, they
professed it. It's true.
Right. They stuck with their story. So that's like I said, you could go back and forth all day. And, if they are saying that they experienced it, then I have to believe that they experienced something.
Yes.
That was supernatural or not of this world.
Well, there are a few things if you want to get into that stuff. So, Philippe Julian wrote a 1965 biography of French poet Robert de Montesquieu. I probably butchered his last name, but so it's a French poet, and he says that at the time of Moberly and Jourdain's excursion to Versailles, Montesquieu lived nearby and gave parties on the grounds where his friends would dress in period costume and perform tableaux vivants as part of the party entertainment. He proposes that Moberly and Jourdain might have inadvertently gate crashed this fancy dress party. And the Marie Antoinette figure could have been a society lady or a cross-dresser. The pockmarked man could have been Montesquieu himself, who was known for having some blemishes on his face. And it's suggested that a gathering of the French decadent avant-garde at the time could have made that impression that they were time-traveling into a different era. And then also Terry Castle, who is a literary critic, a modern literary critic, says that this could have been a shared delusion about which. So I have to. I didn't even know how to. Yeah. So it's a shared delusion because of a lesbian tryst that these two women had, and I'm not entirely sure how those two things tie together. I couldn't find a copy of his work to kind of figure out what exactly he means by that. But he claims that these two women had a shared delusion because of their lesbian interaction with each other.
Okay.
I'm like, I'm not sure where the
we can put that out there. Yeah.
But again, it's a proposed thing, so that's a thing. So hold on to that thought, think about it, and we will be right back here on the Shadows Radio, listening to the Parax Radio Network.
From Ghost Adventures, and you're listening to Parax Radio.
But remember, we'll always see you in the shadows.
Hi, this is Hollywood Hunt Rider Marla Brooks, and you're listening to the Parax Radio Network.
Paramount, 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 Paramount.
Welcome back to the Shadows Radio here on the Parax Radio Network. I'm still Rebecca.
I'm still Cara.
And we are taking a time slip all the way back to 1798 or something.
Wait. I need to be wearing a corset or something.
But it is not because of a lesbian dalliance, which is the most bizarre. I gotta throw that out there and say, what? So we ended on that right before the break, which is bizarre. But in and of itself, there are people who will put out pretty much anything to solve a thing. I don't know. So we talked about kind of the reasons. The biggest one seems to be retrocognition, which is adding to the concept of a story, as they move through the story and everything. And if anybody wants to see, apparently there is a 1981 British movie called Mrs. Morrison's Ghosts, which is about this whole thing. So if you want to go take a look.
Oh, there you go.
You can go watch that and let us know how it is. Let us know if there's any lesbian follies in it or whatever. I just find that bizarre. But so I wanted to talk about what an actual time slip is and how you can, I guess, figure it out. So people have been time slipping, time traveling, whatever, since the dawn of time.
Mm-hmm.
There are ancient myths. Hindu mythology has myths. Buddhist mythology has myths of time travels. Japanese mythology also has time travels for guys that shoot himself 300 years in the future, which is always kind of fun. The only one I haven't seen time travel in is Christian mythology, but there's always been stories of early time machines. Obviously The Time Machine for H.G. Wells is a pretty popular one, which actually came out right about the same time. So the Time Machine by H.G. Wells was 1890 ish. I have to look that up. Or CC, can you rock a Google while I'm talking? But I think it was sometime right around here. So I wonder if they read The Time Machine and then went to the Palace of Versailles and then did things. So
you never know.
It's interesting, but like that whole concept of time travel has always been a lingering thing. You and I were talking during the commercial about, those photos that pop every once in a while, the guy with the cell phone or the girl walking through the Charlie Chaplin movie that looks like she's chatting on a phone or something, or she's
right, yeah.
And there's always those people, and it looks like it's just a normal thing. The other one is the Vermeer painting. Have you ever heard this story where there's a painting by Vermeer, where there's a woman holding what people claim is a cell phone, and it's really her reading a letter or something. But again, it's like, are we looking for these things, or are they actually there? I don't know. But that's just me. Anyway, without getting too deep into spatial and general relativity, because it would make me look really bad because I don't know much about those things.
And it hurts my brain.
Yeah, so there's several different theories behind what can kind of make time travel. So you either talk about whether time is totally linear, so you're jumping back and forward on a straight line, or is it more likely that time is these big curves, basically, like a big pile of spaghetti, and that's when these time slips happen, is when those pieces of spaghetti overlap, which would also supposedly explain why these two women were not able to retrace their steps and revisit this situation, and the fact that the situation resolved itself so quickly. They basically walked through it, and then walked out.
Right.
They didn't do anything to actively come back to their own time, anything like that.
Yeah, they just kept walking.
Sorry, just to go back to the time-traveling cell phone guy, Kat in the chat room says, why do none of them think, who the bleep would she be talking to on a cell phone? That's a good point, because nobody else has, although she could be talking to the guy in the other picture who's also on a cell phone.
Right. It just cracks me up when you get those. You're like, oh my God, really? Do people not have anything else better to do?
Nope, not at all. But we can always say, I'm going to save some of the urban legends and time-traveling stories for other days, because some of them are fun to jump into. There's a lot of them known by name, especially the Philadelphia experiment. That's one of my favorite ones. But it comes down to, how much do you believe about time? How much do we know about time? First off, we don't know much about time. A lot of people will say that time is a human construction. We decided we need to break up our day into countable chunks. Okay, well, the sun goes around the earth. This, takes this long to do it. Okay, let's divide that up into pieces. All right. You know what I mean? So we have kind of constructed this concept of time, but in the overall scheme of things, using time as a more general term, obviously people come and go, people come and go, people come and go. So stuff is happening and passing that we've designed. Excuse me. So it depends. What do you think? Is time linear, or is time a big mass of spaghetti?
I think, in in scientific terms, it's a big ball of wibbly wobbly
sketty
time stuff. Well, it's Doctor Who. It's Doctor Who.
Yeah.
He says it's a big ball of wibbly wobbly,
timey-wimey stuff.
Timey-wimey stuff. And it's that's what I believe it is, because there are too many stories out there to disbelieve that that's the way it is. And it always baffles my mind when I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, if I'm talking to somebody, like when I talk to my friend Kat in England, and I'm like, she is 6 hours ahead of me.
She's not 6 hours ahead of you. She is at the same time as you are. She is literally at the same moment you are. She's marking it differently with a different. So she's not actually at a different time. It's not like she's in the future. She's at the exact same moment you are. She's just marking it differently.
Well, yeah, but that it's dark here and it's light there, and
we live on a marble.
I know, but that's what I'm saying. Like stuff like that, really, you realize the world is so huge, and you're like, no, let's go back. I just want to.
Well, that's like when you fly anywhere and you cross like the date lines, and you have to go relive that same hour again. You're like, oh, so I'm 2 hours older than I actually am. Okay.
Oh, geez, imagine if we had to do that. Oh, good Lord. But yeah, I believe it's a big ball of wibbly wobbly, timey wimey stuff.
Okay, yeah, no,
because it's the only explanation that if all these time slips happen, that people just kind of, or we wouldn't have. Do you think if it was linear and it was just like on different planes, do you think that we would still have these stories?
I don't think so. I mean, I'm agree with you. That we are at it's basically these big overlaps of. Like I said, somebody dropped a pile of spaghetti, and I don't know why, because I don't understand science very well.
Science spaghetti.
Yeah, somebody dropped their science spaghetti on the floor, and created all this big pile of mess. So, we'll see. I don't know. I started reading into some of the theories behind time travel, and can I tell you, my eyes started to cross. I started to cry. I was like, oh my God. This is one topic that I will never understand. That's why I go with the Doctor Who theory. And also, isn't the you're talking about Mackinac Island, isn't the movie based there? Isn't that a time travel movie? Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
just wanted to check. I needed to check because I'm like,
yes,
it's been years since I've seen it, but
it's called Somewhere in Time. It was based off a book by Richard Mather, which is awesome, and I love it. And my mother and I pretty much visited every site on the island that they filmed the movie at. And we reenacted a couple of scenes, and people were looking at us like we were nuts, but it was fun, and it was my once-in-a-lifetime trip. But regardless, yes, that is a time travel, but he traveled purely on mental prowess. He literally laid down and willed himself to go back into the past.
Mm-hmm.
And it worked up until he, spoiler alert, didn't anymore, and he screwed it up. The movie's from the 70s. If you haven't seen it by now, sorry.
Yeah.
But that's one of those things. It's like, okay, so he didn't need any kind of physical mechanism to bring him to the past. He literally sat down and willed himself into the past. Like, okay, that's a take. Like, that is a version.
He meditated until he could get there.
Pretty much. And then you got the people that believe that you have to hit one of these time slips at just the right spot. You've got people that believe that you need some kind of time mechanism. And then you have the people that sit there and present the theory, okay, that's great. We're all going back in time. Why has nobody come to our time? Why have we not seen, Xenon from the future come back and tell us not to vote for certain people or do certain things or whatever. Yeah.
That's a good question. Why don't we? Maybe are those what aliens are?
You think aliens are Xenon from the future?
Yeah, are aliens just us from the future?
Okay, then what happened to the human race that turned us big-eyed and gray?
I don't know. Just a theory. Just a theory.
And yes, Kat, you missed lots of story about Mackinac Island. I will gladly share with you after the show is over because I loved it. It was so much fun. But anyway.
And when she wins the lottery, she's taking us all with her.
Yes, I will.
Yes, I will. I almost got her speechless on that one.
I was trying to come up with would I move there? But I don't really want to, I don't know if I want to move there because apparently it gets down to frozen ass lake in the winter. And I wasn't feeling that. They were like, oh yeah, we take snowmobiles up and over the lake and just go to the mainland. I'm like, what?
Oh yeah. Okay.
That lake that I just took a 45-minute ferry to get from the mainland to the island. I'm sorry, I'm digressing, but it freezes over enough that you can take a snowmobile. Yeah. Okay. No, thank you.
Okay. We're just going to visit then.
Yes. I will go gladly anytime between April and October. And then you're done. But, so we run into, what the idea of a paradox is, right?
Mm-hmm.
So a paradox is that something happens that screws up something else, basically, and that the original thing cannot exist. And that was one of my biggest problems with the movie Somewhere in Time that we were talking about. Because, dude, the watch did not exist. Because he gave it to her, and then she gave it to him, and then he gave it to her, and it was this big, giant loop. But nobody ever created the watch in the first place. So that makes a paradox. So, and I feel like this is the problem with time travel, though. So, in this story that we were talking about here with Petit Trianon and Versailles and all that, honestly, these women didn't really do anything other than walk by a bunch of people. Right. They didn't interact with anybody. They didn't kind of go through anything. And, so they didn't really make any effect, but I believe it's called the butterfly effect. Yes. Where, if you step on a butterfly, did you suddenly did you bring back the dinosaurs? So
look at Back to the Future, another time travel. He had to save his parents. They would make sure his parents get together before him and his siblings disappeared.
Yeah. So I feel like time travel is not worth it. Would I love to time travel? Yes. But would I want to? No. But see, now my head is spinning right now. So you're going to follow me on this really weird tangent of conscious thought here. Okay, ready?
Go ahead. Go for it.
So if you go back in time from today to, 20 years ago, and you land there, that means that 20 years ago, you were already there. So anything that you already did 20 years ago should already be part of the timeline. So going back 20 years ago shouldn't screw up the timeline because it already happened. So the butterfly theory is the idea that you go back in time and you step on a butterfly, you kill it, and the dinosaurs are no longer extinct. But if you've already gone in the past already happened. You can't change the past. So it already happened, because if you go back in the past and you change it, then it becomes the future because it's no longer the past, because the past has already happened.
Oh my God. This is why I don't do So the only other time travel theory that I came across was in Harry Potter, when she uses the necklace and she's like, we can't show ourselves to ourselves. And I was like,
you should never show yourself to yourself.
But then she picks up a rock and throws it, and it actually hits them. And I did the same thing you just did. But if it's a passive, yeah.
But in the first timeline, she threw the rock because it had already happened. So she had to throw the rock. Just like when he got to the lake, he had to conjure the Patronus because he had already done it. He thought his dad had done it, so he was waiting for his dad to show up. Spoiler, by the way. So there's that.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. Like, you have all these, the past is the past.
Yeah, Vicky in the chat room says, I love that you're creating your entire understanding of time travel based on movies from the 70s and the 80s. Well, Harry Potter was from the 2000s. Also, I hate the Terminator, so we're not going to mention Sarah Connor.
Yeah, we don't. I've never even seen it. So 70s, yeah, was Somewhere in Time. 80s is Back to the Future. 90s, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. 2000s. We didn't even go to Bill and Ted.
That's because I never saw that movie, so I can't.
You never saw that movie, and they used a telephone booth? Oh my gosh!
I mean, I know the concept, but But I go back and I say I still don't know that I necessarily buy into the concept of a paradox. So like, for example, somewhere in time, and yes, I'm using a movie. There's a watch that she gives to him and he gives to her and then she gives to him. And basically the watch just goes back and forth between the two of them. But technically the watch was never created. The watch was never introduced into the cycle. He introduced it. No, he didn't, because she gave it to him in 1971, and then he gave it back to her in 1912, and then she gave it back to him in 1971, and then he gave it to her in 1912. Literally, no one introduced it into the circle. Do you understand what I'm saying? Okay. So she got it from him, but he got it from her, and she got it from him, and it basically just goes in this big loop. So, like, that is a paradox to me. The idea that you can go back and crush a butterfly and, like I said, unextinct the dinosaurs, I feel like that can't happen because the past has already happened. I have already ranted for 15 minutes now on Somewhere in Time and the stupid watch. Like, that's already happened. We can't change that. It's done. Right. So if future me decides to come back and smack me stupid for saying some of this stuff, again, it's already happened. It has happened at some point. Whether I know it's future me or I think it's just some crazy old lady who just walked into my house, you know, that's what that's my problem. Like, I don't necessarily know that I buy into the butterfly theory or the butterfly paradox, but I definitely buy into the idea that there are some paradoxes that happen because, you know, sometimes things just kind of happen or whatever. Well, I think that time travel, there is no real reason or... There's no real reason for time travel? There's no real... not reason. There's no reason for time travel. There's really I am now leaving the world for no reason. No, it's just... I am the greatest. There's no, you know... It's all theories and it's all... It's sort of like ghosts. It's all theories and it's all, you know... Nothing's ever going to be proven about time travel because... Everybody, I mean, like when you see in like movies or TV or anything like that, they can make up anything to go along with it. All right, so we are going to take a field trip to Petit Trianon, and we're going to do this as a listening audience. So I want everybody who's now dialed in or whatever to get your tickets. We'll all meet there, and we will wander all the paths until we find this time slip. And then we will make it happen. Oh, I'm not going to France, I'm telling you right now. Future Eric B. has just walked into the studio. Oh, now he's past Eric B. because it already happened. We are experiencing time travel right now. Yes, right this second. But on that note, we just want to say happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. We are not going to be on the air for the next 2 weeks because of holidays, so we will see you in 2019. The first show of the year is always our Psychic Roundup. Oh, yeah. So that'll be a lot of fun. Yes. And again, I apologize for the on and off of the last couple of weeks. Like I said, it's been a really rough time to be me, so I apologize for all that. It's been a little crazy. People understand. Yeah, I know, but I'm still saying sorry. So thanks for sticking with us. Hopefully you didn't slip into a past while we were talking or slip into sleep. Either one. No comas. Please. Yes. All right. And on that note, I am Rebecca. I'm Cara. And we'll see you in the shadows.